Today's lesson, sentence faults, specifically fragments. Sentence fragments are one of the most common errors that I see in student papers. I know that many of you may have read popular works of fiction in which writers use the sentence fragment as a creative statement. I don't like to see those in student papers. So, what is a sentence? As most of you probably remember from grade school and middle school and high school, a full sentence must have a subject and verb and must be able to stand alone as a complete thought. So what's a fragment? Sentence fragments drop the thoughts. Fragments do sometimes serve a purpose in creative writing, as I mentioned with some of the popular works of fiction, but it's best to avoid them in academic writing at this level. I don't want to see fragments in student writings in this class. However, ask your other professors if they have a preference and if you feel strongly about using a fragment to make a specific statement. Is this a fragment? See what you think. The tests were easy, especially the essay questions. We felt confident that we had done well. What do you see in this sentence that could be a fragment? Think about it just for a minute to yourself. Is it the tests were easy? No, that has a subject and verb. Especially the essay questions. Yes, that's not a complete thought. It's kind of like an incomplete, it's very much an incomplete thought. Sort of like that add-on thing that you do when you're talking. Correct this by rewording the sentence and inserting the fragment into one of the sentences. For example, the test, comma, especially the essay questions, were easy. We felt confident that we had done well. There are about 5 different types of fragments. There's the noun phrase fragment, the added detail phrase fragment, the prepositional phrase fragment, present participle, past participle, and infinitive phrase fragment, and the missing subject fragment. And all of these are easily corrected. For example, with the noun phrase fragment, you might have a sentence that says something like, I was afraid of my wrestling coach, a harsh and sarcastic man. He was never satisfied with my performance. The fragment comes with a harsh and sarcastic man because it's only a phrase. True, it is a very creative phrase, but you need to reword it so that it doesn't say that, so it's not a fragment. So you might reword it to say, a harsh and sarcastic man, comma, I was afraid of my wrestling coach. The added detail phrase fragment. Here's the sentence. Many people have difficulty getting up in the morning, especially on Mondays after a hectic weekend. They wish they had more than one day to relax. The phrase, especially on Mondays after a hectic weekend, is the added detail. And you could correct that by saying that many people have difficulty getting up in the morning, comma, especially on Mondays after a hectic weekend. Prepositional phrase fragments. After a long day at work, period, I drove to the bank that opened last week, on the corner of Holly Avenue and Red Oak Lane, period, next to the discount supermarket. The writer in this case just used prepositional phrases and did not connect them to the rest of the sentence. Present participle, past participle, or an infinitive phrase fragment. Waiting, the present participle, to buy tickets for the concert, period. The crowd stood quietly in line, period. No one cared that the box office would be closed until morning. The missing subject phrase fragment. Every weekend, comma, the fraternities sponsored a joint open house party, period, and blared music all night long. Not surprisingly, comma, neighbors became furious. The phrase, and blared music all night long, is a sentence fragment. So you can kind of see where sometimes these are fragments. The writer might think he or she is adding something creatively to the work. However, it is a sentence fragment, and these are not to be written in student papers at this level. How to correct a fragment. Attach the fragment to the preceding or following sentence and change the punctuation or capitalization accordingly. Here's an example of of correcting a fragment. Overwhelmed by school pressures and family demands, comma, she decided to postpone her education. I believe the original sentence said something about the fragment started at the beginning of the sentence. Overwhelmed by school pressures and family demands, period. She decided to postpone her education. That was a mistake. You can also insert the fragment into the preceding or following sentence and add commas as needed. Here's a fragment that was listed in one of the other books. A robust girl who loved physical activity from the time she was a baby, period. My sister qualified for the Olympics when she was 17. The writer can correct this as my sister, comma, a robust girl who loved physical activity from the time of infancy, comma, qualified for the Olympics when she was 17. You can also attach the fragment to a newly created sentence. For example, the corrected sentence would say, although I proudly call it mine, my apartment does have some problems. For example, it has very little heat in the winter. And then the corrected one is, although I proudly call it mine, my apartment has some problems. For example, it has very little heat in the winter. You can also supply the missing subject. Example, although they argued frequently, my grandparents doted on each other and held hands wherever they went. The phrase, and held hands wherever they went, is a fragment. Correct it by saying, although they argued frequently, my grandparents doted on each other and held hands wherever they went, and thereby you've made it one sentence. You can also test sentence fragments in your work. You can use the "it is true that" phrase in front of your suspected sentence fragment and see if it's a true fragment. If it doesn't make sense with "it is true that" in front of it, it is probably a fragment. Complete sentences will make sense with the "it is true that" test.